Okay, this is going to be a bit of a different talk than we're used to. We're not going to talk about dams or levees. No, we're talking about one dike. That's it. That's all we're talking about in this talk today. But Rick and I are really excited to give this talk, and it's going to be a collaborative talk, and that's going to be the theme throughout here is how can we collaborate together as Indigenous knowledge keepers and Western scientists to further risk resiliency within our communities. And this is a conversation that we started. We've actually only worked together for one field day. So this is a continuation of a really good conversation that we had in a field day together. And I'm really excited to give this. Rick's going to start us off about how we got here. So how did we lose that connection or build those silos between Indigenous knowledge and Western science? And then I'm going to use 2021 as an example in which conversations and connections with Indigenous communities really led to some things that we found with Western, or that we have proved essentially with Western science, or not proved, but made possible to talk and discover about. And then Rick's going to talk about the local community, so his community with Leq'á and some of the damages that they saw in 2021. And then we're going to kind of wrap it up in terms of how do we move forward? How do we collaborate together to really further what all of us want to do together? And that's to improve the safety of our communities and the environment together. So I'll pass it to Rick here to really get us started.
And thank you, Carrie-Ann, and Carrie-Ann's friend. I'm now a little nervous, actually, being up here in Stativies-Hyder. It's the conversations we were having earlier, and understanding that she has something in her background that was maybe explosive, fireworks, or yeah. But I'll do my best, and hopefully you guys will make sure I get out of here safely until I pick up and back to my community. So I do struggle. My mother's Scottish, and that's part of the luck I have. My father was Matsqui First Nation. We've resided in the Leq'á First Nation now for a couple of generations. And I just think that's fair to present right now, because really it leads to some of the things that we'll be discussing here tonight, is that challenge that we have in the blending. And I think probably best we leave that till a little bit later into the discussion. I also like you to know that I do have my traditional name. My traditional name is Tumukamafakwe. So Tumukamafakwe translates in English to be, at least I believe it does, that's what the elders tell me. It translates to, no, I'm kidding. It's a man from the earth, from the Matsqui. So I don't know yet. I have to live to that now. So we'll do the best that we can tonight to make sure that my ancestors look down favorably. How we got here, where were we? This is quite a conversation that we're having, and I'm going to do everything I can to help it resonate, because it is extremely important in the field that we're working, and especially with the new directions of our federal and provincial governments, and the Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, and what that Article 29 and Article 32 means in the day-to-day activities that we do in our professional lives. Historically, one of the waterways that I'll speak about tonight, and I'll try to stay out of that geeky side of what I do and try and stay with that traditional lens, and work towards finding ways that we can do things better as we move on. But I'll dive into it a little bit right here, is that after contact, infrastructure started to go in, and our community, we have 10 reserve lands, and we have, of those 10 reserve lands, we have one that's perched on a hillside, 9 that are in the floodplain, and 1 is completely washed away. We have a sliver of land, might add up to about a half an acre in the middle of the Fraser River. Truly not developable. So one would think on that perched land we would be able to build our community, but in fact, that's where I met Carrie-Ann, in the work that we're doing, because that land is one of the most challenged with flooding. And we'll get into that, and I think Carrie will do a very good job of actually presenting that and the challenges that we have with what's going on in that mid-slope and how little we truly do know about the mid-slope and the work that we have ahead of us. We won't get to resiliency until we understand it. But at contact, CP Rail came through. Dikes were built, highways were built. CP Rail chose to build their rail bed or their rail line in a creek that we know now today is DeRose Creek. And it forever altered the channel of DeRose Creek. That was the only foundation they could find to actually build their rail. Changed the entire landscape. We lost a wetland. We lost the fish that kept us healthy, and it was a large wetland that provided very well for our community. And what it did is it rerouted the stream to the outflow of the Nakoman and on to the Fraser River, but it rerouted it in a way that there's a lot of grade, creating even more problems. And we'll get into that a little bit further. But that's where we came from. That's where it all began. It all began. Prior to that, we had a functioning water ecosystem in our communities. Not only did we have a functioning ecosystem, we had a very good healthcare system. We had a very good education system. We had a very good post-secondary, as we would recognize it here, education system. But that was all done orally. It was done with nature. It was done in parallel with nature. Nature was our guide. Nature was our leader. And we've lost sight of that. Not just our nations, and matter of fact, maybe the nations haven't quite, but we certainly have, and we need to work better to try and ensure that we get nature back to where she needs to be so that she can continue to heal herself, us assisting her, because over the last 150 years, we've done a good job of actually damaging her. The public understanding of science is somewhat of a challenge. There's check boxes, and I'm addressing a group tonight. I guess I'll qualify this a little bit. I led the team to put the Indigenous lens over the K-12 education system for British Columbia. So I led that team to indigenize the curriculum of BC for K-12. Those kids are now going to be completing grade 12 and moving on into a post-secondary program. That all of that was for naught. There's nothing in the post-secondary programs that actually recognizes it. There's no check boxes, just as the jobs that we do in the field that we've chosen to work. And you're doing a great job. Don't stop. I'm no way damning it, no way calling it out. But with so many others, other programs that we teach in our post-secondary institutions, we have a college of biology, or we have a college that actually oversees the values, ensures that those values are met and that they're delivered daily by the people that are signed into it. That gives us an avenue to get in there and actually have check boxes to recognize Indigenous values, Indigenous lens, the Indigenous knowledge, that traditional knowledge. It gives us the opportunity to do that, but we don't have that here. We don't have that here, and this is a very difficult one for us to get by. And I don't know the answer, but I do know that you're going to see more of me and folks like me as we move on in the next few years with this same message, so that we start to get it to resonate, so that we start thinking about it a little bit more. We do recognize it, we do see it, we do hear it in our day-to-day activities and the collaborative approaches that we put together. We have task force for just about every stream that was damaged, it seems right now in 2021. It certainly stretches me thin and my team thin. And that's great, because traditional knowledge is finding its way into it. But it's not, we do a good job of talking that talk. We're not doing a good job of walking that walk. We don't have a way for us now, me speaking from this post-second, the educated piece, we do have a way for us to put the information into the system to find the funding to actually get the support. We don't have a way for traditional knowledge to be a part of that, other than to say, you can check only one box so far, we collaborated, which is a big step forward, because it's much better than consulting. When they consulted, they came to us in our communities and they said, we're going to fix the river, but forever you'll never have fish in it, right? I mean, that's stretching it, but that's how it came to us. They consulted. They've met their duty as legislators and as employees of those legislators of what they needed to do. The box was checked. Today, under Article 29 and Article 32 of DRIPA, they actually have to have us included. And we need to be a part of that decision-making process. And in the case of Leq'á, which is a little bit different than other nations, but we all have our own autonomy, we have what we know as a strategic engagement agreement with the provincial government. And in that, we have a process that we follow. So they come to us, they say, this is what we would like to do. What we're going to do is sit down, we're going to find the way through it, and then if we disagree at the end, we have a process that we both signed off that we will move through to ensure that we get as close as we can to the desired outcome. That may mean that we're not successful. They may not listen to everything that the First Nation has to say, but at least the process was there. So now I've taken us a little bit further and than where we were supposed to be on where we were, but I think that's important to show because really where we were was in a very balanced, very valuable society. Then all of a sudden there was contact and we lost that as Indigenous people. And now we got to find our way back to it. And as a matter of fact, legislation is in place to help us get to that place. Now we'll take it to the next slide. Is that one?
Yep, all good.
Okay. You know how to read.
I know how to do it. Yeah. Okay, thanks, Rick. That's why I wanted to bring Rick up, because I think this is something that I can talk about, but I think it's important. Like, this is a collaboration and a conversation. That's how we've designed this presentation today. I'm going to bring us to 2021 and what we saw as a result of 2021 and kind of tie how these conversations came about and how we started talking about them. But when we look at the atmospheric river in 2021, we don't just look at it as a single event. This was a series of climate change driven events that started in June 2021 with the historic heat dome, the wildfires that were triggered as that heat dome broke up. Then we looked almost immediately to a wetter than normal fall, and then with the November and December atmospheric rivers. So when we're talking about cumulative effects or cumulative issues, we have to look at all of these things, not only from a land change perspective, but also how climate change is affecting it as well. Ooh, we got a really delayed transition slide. All right, cool. So my day started November 14th looking at the weather forecasts. As I was doing almost every Friday, I was issuing bulletins saying we've got a really severe weather event coming in. And this one was a little bit different. It seemed a bit worse than normal, but in the end ended up being, as we all know, a very significant event. But when you look at the return period of that atmospheric river, it was only about 5 to 10 year return period. And the rainfall return periods ranged anywhere from 50 to 1,000 years. And if you look closely at that pattern of that, part of what that has to do with is the way that that atmospheric river was oriented into the Fraser Valley. And Rick's community of Leq'á is about halfway through the Fraser Valley. And it was probably a pretty wet day. Yeah, pretty wet day. Their nation got flooded. Lots of critical infrastructure was cut off, and so were many of the communities. And as we pushed further into the interior, what really showed up, and as kind of what I'll illustrate in a little bit, is that atmospheric river pushed over what we would consider to be the historic rain shadow of the coast mountains, and really into climates that aren't used to seeing that much rain. And so a lot of these Indigenous communities are saying, the rains are behaving differently than they used to. We can't rely upon older weather patterns. And so we're having to think about these extreme events and listening to some of the communities about what they're noticing in some places where rain's falling where it didn't used to be, or it used to be snow. Now, I'm not gonna like this moving forward. We're gonna try it. So this is a series of talks that I've given over the past few years just about the 2021 event, but I'm gonna focus on really the two black boxes here. I'm gonna talk a little bit about cumulative damages and really focus on wildfire and logging effects in conditioning the landscape to debris flows and debris floods, and then how those sediment inputs then led to a lot of the sediment transport and channel changes that we saw. And I'm going to make reference to a paper that my colleague Kyle W. and I are putting together that really highlights some of these issues. And so it's a work in progress, but something that we're really proud of in kind of supporting this. So as many of us know, we saw a significant amount of damages to communities as well as infrastructure and ecological systems, and kind of two extremes. Got the debris flow on the left here near Pemberton. That was actually triggered in the later series of November storms that I think Pierre was flying over top of shortly after this. And then we've got the city of Merritt there inundated by floodwaters from the Coldwater River. And in working with the communities and responding to this event, I began to hear a lot of really similar questions. So they were asking me, what is the role of these wildfires play in what the damages that we saw? How does logging affect what we saw? How do we explain these more frequent events occurring over time? And it's something that both Indigenous and settler communities have been asking as part of these conversations, but it really sparked something of, well, we probably all know the answer to this. It probably played some role, but how do we look at it through a Western science lens and see if this actually makes sense? So this kind of began this conversation of curiosity, and Kyle and I kind of meeting together, talking about river changes, and me talking about more on the geotech side about landslides and what those look like. And what we wanted to do is kind of inform, what does resiliency look like moving forward? How do we take the learnings from this really disastrous event and think about a climate and a future that we have no analogies for? So the context of this conversation is that much of southern British Columbia has been affected in some shape or form by a cumulative impact. And the map that you're seeing here in the greens, that's all the extent of logging, and the oranges are the increasing wildfires that are occurring on our landscape. And the gaps that you see in the middle are generally protected areas. So not a lot outside of protected areas has been untouched by these events. And so that's the context that many of these communities are facing. They've got watersheds that have been logged upslope of them, or they've recently been affected by a fire. And you can see that the size of these events, especially those dark oranges, those wildfires are becoming larger and larger with time. So we began a really ambitious exercise. So this is a lot of us doing this work. In the initial days, it was field crews going out logging these different events. And then I spent countless nights just staring at Google Earth and putting all of this inventory together. So we looked at satellite imagery. The upper right example that you can see, there is a program called HazMapper, which is a vegetation differencing model to look at changes in vegetation. And the really dark red slash that you see there in the middle is a total loss of vegetation, which indicates a landslide. Done a lot of field-based studies in the bottom left there. And then in the right, you can see the damages to a house resulting from the flood in the Coldwater. And that identified more than 1,000 geohazards spread across southern British Columbia. So anything ranging from landslides to debris flows to floods. So a big spectrum of events and responses. And here's the map of what those looked like. And kind of remembering in your mind what the distribution of that precipitation looked like, it looks similar, but there's some differences. So the first thing I want you to notice is if I just put the cursor over kind of up and above Hope, is that's where really that center of that storm cell. So most of the rain fell. So it makes sense. We've got lots of blues, lots of landslides in that area. But how do we begin to explain some of these ones that are further inland? Well, a lot of those are landslides that were triggered by bank erosion. So where we had the Coldwater River begin to move very unstable and then downstream into the Leq'á River. You'll also notice that there was a bunch of rivers that were laterally unstable in the Fraser Canyon. And as I'll show kind of in an example with the next couple slides here, a lot of those have a strong history of logging through that stretch. There's also a series of wildfires that have occurred all across this area. And what we began to kind of tease out was in watersheds that we saw these cumulative damages, we also saw the rivers become unstable. And when you looked at the corresponding river right beside it, or the watershed right beside it, if it was more of a naturally occurring system, we saw less sediment, less movement. So there was still a response, but it was less so than those that we saw those cumulative impacts from. And that's the same story that these communities had been asking us. And what we did was we just said, let's look to the data. Let's see what the data is telling us from that Western science lens. So this inventory, for those, this is going to be about the only stats that are in this presentation, but we've got about 1,300 landslides, so discrete sediment inputs that were mapped across that area. And about 15% of those had some relationship to wildfire. So wildfires that had occurred over the last 20 years. Most of them, about 120, were from the 2021 wildfire season, remembering that context of what that year looked like. And that's pretty consistent with our understanding of post-wildfire hazards. Usually the first couple of years following a wildfire, you get the most debris flows. But what shocked me was looking at wildfires that were 20 years old, 23 years old, were having disproportionate sediment come out of them compared to their neighbors. And in a lot of those watersheds, what we were seeing was the vegetation hadn't grown back. So there was a shift in the ecology of that watershed that has not been repaired for the 20 years following that fire. We also had, and is kind of spectacularly thrown through a lot of the media sources, is resource road failures. So logging road or mining roads, anything that's kind of leading to an extractive resource. And so about 200 of those, both on highway networks and off highway networks, were from these resource roads. And importantly, in the publicly available data sets of those provinces, about 40% of those are unmapped roads. So things that we can see in imagery or in LiDAR, but that aren't mapped. And that has an important management consideration when we think about risks moving forward. About 200 of these geohazards were sourced in logged cut blocks that varied in ages. As some of you may know, there was a change in the code around resource management in the 1990s that Rick was heavily involved in to kind of reduce the amount of logging-related incidents, debris flows coming off of these areas. But we still noticed that there was about half of them were sourced from cut blocks that were after that code change. And a lot of what we saw was these debris floods, so these sediment sources that were derived from these large cut block watersheds. And then a big chunk, as we talked about, was originated by rivers, so undercutting the toe as the rivers moved around. And then basically starting a sediment conveyor belt. So you got a slide that went into a river that went downstream, caused bank erosion, caused another slide, and it just perpetuated downstream. Now, an example of this really strongly in the Fraser Canyon is within the Nahatlatch River watershed, which is within the traditional Incapamilk territory. So that's just north of Boston Bar on the west side of the Fraser Canyon. And as you can see here in this diagram, you've got Kukupik Creek, which is coming through left to right in the image, and then top to bottom, the Nahatlatch River. And where those two rivers meet, you can see the strong sediment pulse coming out of Kukupik Creek and into the Nahatlatch River. And that river has an important consideration from the community. It's a managed salmon watershed that had spawning channels that were constructed by the nation. But you can also see in the diagram here, I've overlaid what was the 2021 fire, that's in orange. There was a 2023 fire that is not on this image yet, that burned the rest of it. And then the green things are all cut blocks. And the debris flows that you can see there that we've pointed out, those are debris flows that are occurring not only in logged areas, but also in wildfire areas. And so we had these sediment sources that started these and went into the channels. And then you saw that sediment source then translate into the river downstream. So why is this happening? Why are we getting these really unstable river channels downstream of sediment sources? So this is kind of one of our working theories that we're working with right now is why do we get post-wildfire hazards, resource roads contributing to this? And you can see in this kind of sketch that I've put together, it's really about that connectivity between the channel. So normally when we get a debris flow, it deposits onto a fan. There's sort of an attenuation of that sediment before it comes into the mainstem river. But when you get post-wildfire debris flows that are much larger than normally occurring debris flows, or you get resource road failures directly into a channel, there's a more direct linkage there. So more sediment per watershed contributing area is going into the mainstem channel. When you get that, the river has to respond. So in some shape or form, it's going to move laterally to accommodate that sediment. And so when you begin to accommodate that sediment, you're then pushing it and basically pulling it from the bank and then pushing it onto the next channel bar. And as Rick is going to show through his work, That's a lot of what a system is naturally designed to do. You're pushing it from one area and depositing it in another area, or pulling and pushing. And when we did this, there was too much sediment in the system. And so it resulted in all of these areas of accumulation as well as deposition. Now that sounds really simplistic, but that's really what it is. It's all a net, we have to count for the mass and put it somewhere. The other thing that Rick has pointed out in the conversations as we were kind of reviewing this slide is when we change our landscapes to this kind of post-wildfire behavior, it also changes the sediment composition. So the ash and all the fines that are associated with the fire create debris flows with a lot higher mobility. So they have the ability to transfer over a larger distance, in addition to all of the logs that are being thrown into that channel. And if you've ever worked in rivers before, you can know that a log, a really big log, can be your best friend or your worst enemy, because it's going to undo everything that you thought about and you've constructed in your watershed. So I'm going to transfer it back to Rick here, and he's going to talk about some of the consequences that he saw within his community in 2021, and then the work that they're doing now to recover or restore from that.
Thanks, Carrie-Ann. A few things. The sediment composition has been a real challenge for us. It comes off of those higher gradient, off of those radical slopes that are south-facing through the Fraser Valley. And immediately as it hits the toe, it hits the basin, and there's no gradient. So that flow is challenged all the way down, and so these finer sediments are finding their way into the system at a much higher level than we've ever recognized in the past. And elders are telling us they've never seen it. So, I don't think it takes rocket scientists to tell us or explain to us why that is. It's the way that slope is being harvested at this point. And another thing that's critical and has been extremely challenging for our communities is that wagging of that stream. And the challenge are the sediment deposits that are building up and building further back into the system, wagging the stream into these toes and bringing down even more material. Not to mention the amount of Greater Vancouver infill that's coming out into our valley and finding a way to be dumped into our low gradient areas to build more farmland. I don't know what we didn't learn in the past, because it sure as hell hadn't worked in the past to build valuable farmland. But we seem to be stuck in that rut again with trying to build up with materials that you have to find a place for it to go in the Fraser Valley, creating more challenges for me, because that's fines. That's fines that's making it into the system in these range, in the range that we have. And it's choking off systems, valuable habitat, and creating even more problems. So our watersheds above the communities that we have, those are, I think, it in a nutshell. It's the way that we're treating that mid-slope. Now, Carrie-Ann had brought up working towards resilience. And I really have my team not talk about resilience. I want them talking about adapting. And we can't be resilient until we understand what it is we have to adapt to. And we don't have clear data of that mid-slope. We have good data, not great data, but we have good data where there's votes for our politicians. That's where we have good data, and that's in the
our data is questionable.
Yeah, that's the dike protected area. But once we get above that, where our challenges are truly coming from is that mid-slope. It's the conveyance of the sediments that are coming off of that mid-slope that's choking off our basin and flooding it, bringing the water levels, top water, higher and higher with each passing year. And climate change is a big part of that, no doubt at all. But we're not helping climate change at the level that we're harvesting, at the level that we're mining out of that mid-slope. And in the community of Halakton, which is the one reserve that's perched on the hillside, we have a mine above it, and we have logging above it. And both of those have created avulsions in that mid-slope that has brought water down in different areas that it never had before. We just completed a brand new daycare for our community, and an avulsion took place in the slope. It separated two ponds or two holding waters up on the slope above us, and it brought a new creek down in between them. That can't be re-diverted. So now that's coming down and shooting towards through our community and into our daycare. And those are the challenges that we face from the avulsion. So, and actually, Carrie's slide, I've worked with Case Lohman and Connor Budd from UBC. I don't know if you know them, but they're brilliant landscape architects. But we've worked with them to put some photos together, landscape architecture, so that we can actually show and have people understand what it is. Not in the science world, but politicians and the people that are working in there, so they understand what it is. We can point to it and hopefully get them. I mean, my dad used to say, "Do I have to draw it with crayons for you?" You know, and that's how I feel with some of the decision makers, that we need to put it to them. So we put together these to explain to them how these avulsions are taking place. So the floods in the Hatzic Valley are partially a couple of actually 3 of the waterways that created the most problems in the Hatzic Valley were from avulsions. They were extractions of timber, clear cuts, just at the high part of the mid slope. That in that rain of 2021, the debris caught and it came down into where the creek would normally flow through and down into its release point, where there is conveyance through the infrastructures, and the trees that were still standing worked like rakers. So building up behind them was all the debris. And then behind that was the fines that were coming from rescouring a surface and finding a new channel. Building a dam behind it that slowly worked its way off to each side, finding new contours in the land to actually bring the creeks down. The creeks have now found new ways to come down the mountain, and there is no conveyance through the infrastructure. So the highways are starting to get worn because they're saturated. There is no conveyance. And even if there were, it wouldn't be enough. If we put it back into the channel that it needed to be, which isn't going to happen, it's too expensive to do, there isn't enough conveyance through that infrastructure or in those pipes, to those tubes, those culverts, to get the water through at the level that the water's coming through, because of the way that they've treated that slope with clear cut. You know, and I think that's important to share here, because those are the challenges that we face in the Fraser Valley, and certainly through our reserves. Leq'á is the largest First Nation in the Stolo Territory. We have the most landmass, I guess. We're not the highest population. We're close to the top, but we have the greatest amount of landmass. But we were given landmass that really has no value because it's sitting all in the flooded area.
Sorry, can you just point out it's a bit difficult to tell the difference between the reserve boundaries and the cut blocks. Because your mid-slope reserve is the one on the far right?
Yeah.
This is Halacton, the reserve that we were just talking about, is right here.
Okay.
And then those are all the cut blocks above it. Sorry, the brownish colors, and then the orange colors are the reserves.
Okay.
And some of those are both Leq'á Reserve as well as other Stolo territory reserves.
Yeah, and the gravel mine is just off of the center point of the Halacton. You know, it looks like a set of stairs. So the second stair, there's a gravel mine up in that is actually perched in a mid-slope where it actually holds it. So all these water is collecting in there, and they're ponds that they use to wash. They have a massive dam built in front of it to hold the water back, and it can't take the volume of water that's coming at it now with these challenges. So that is beginning to break down. So we're working with that. That one? Yeah. So Duros Creek, it's kind of my pride. I've been on Duros Creek for a number of years. Duros Creek faces all of these challenges. The back end is heavily logged through the 80s and 90s, and I hate to date myself, but Carrie-Ann did a good job of doing that on me today when she said I went back and I pulled up a study, and there was your name in this study, and it must have been about 2006. No, it wasn't. But anyways, I've been in that watershed for quite a number of years, and it's heavily logged. The back end of the watershed is completely clear cut, and then through the center we have 2 canyons. And those canyons are the place of major slide activity. And the slide activity is happening, and I don't know if we can show it here. Probably not. I won't be able to pick it out on this one. But it's clear cut right to the edge of the top. So it's perched, clear cut to the perch. The water's just finding its way and going over. And in that, believe it or not, they cut the roads instead of bringing it up and running it through the flatland. So they cut the roads. Well, through the 90s, and I would assume that was the study that Carrie-Anne was into, we deactivated as many of those as we possibly could, but we didn't know where they were. We actually had to get up there and truck around on the hillside to figure it out because none of that was ever mapped. We got what we could, but we're still living with debris flows that are caused from the rotting of the punching, of the way that they used to build roads. They punched cedar logs into the hillside and then filled on top of them. Well, now the cedar logs are rotting, decaying, and the material is slipping down and creating landslides into our system. And that system comes right down into our second highest populated community, perched to some degree. And we'll get into that a little bit further. Whoop. I probably shouldn't have jumped it ahead that quick. So we talked about CPKC and the railway and how that challenged us. You see the blue lines here. That was the alignment of DeRose Creek. In fact, it's missing a third one. And through the V of that was an entire wetland historically. That was all altered because of CPKC, and this no longer connects. There's a slough that flows, and are you seeing my cursor on there? Yeah, so this is what we know as North of Common Slough. It's got a couple of small tribs that fill in or feed it in here, but they're not year-round tribs. This piece is no longer there because this railway that's running beside it is running in its bed. And the result of that was DeRose Creek now found its new way down in through here, straight down this steeper gradient and into the slough. And through that, and this is, you'll see in some of the other ones that come up, that delta has really grown. And in fact, what it's done is it's turned DeRose Slough into 3 lakes. So we no longer have a slough that's functioning and has flow. We have 3 different perched lakes through the system. And we're working to correct that. As a matter of fact, we're moving ahead with some of that work. I've got machines in the waterway right now. So this, another thing that's fair to add is that this did historically house, was spawning channel and rearing for all species of salmon. So we had pinks in there, we had Chinook, we had coho, we had chum, we had it all, and steelhead. In recent years, as a matter of fact, last year we actually had a boost. And we're still trying to understand why the numbers boosted last year. But before last year, we had 24 chum show up in that watershed. 24, that was it, no coho. So it was, for all intents and purposes, it was pretty much done. And we've taken away the vibrancy of it. So we're rebuilding this right now with flood boxes to actually control the flows, and then daylighting and reconnecting it to DeRose Creek. So we'll get into that a little bit later in here. But this wetland was full of life, full of value. We had, as a matter of fact, elk. The last elk in this wetland here between this and Skumalaf was recognized and recorded in 1902. We have elk back now. So year and a half we've been monitoring our elk. We have 3 herds. One herd has 8, one has 23, the other has 14. So they're coming back. Maybe it was a double-edged sword, the 2021 event. So this is it today. So you can see the delta on DeRose at DeRose Creek here and how that's grown. It's extremely disturbing. It's actually cut the slough right off. But if you take a look here, that delta has connected land to land now. But this water is being held back. So every time we move into a flow or a heavy rain flow, or actually just a rain flow, it finds its way to flow through, and we've got some better ones coming up a little bit further, but it's eroding through and cutting into Highway 7. So the higher portion of Nokomis Slough is finding its channel against Highway 7. And it's finding its channel against Highway 7 because of the way DeRose Creek reacted to the 2021 event. DeRose Creek brought down sediment, and there's, as a matter of fact, there's about 22 meters of sediment buildup through here that pushed the creek right up against the Highway 7 protection dike, cutting the toe off of the dike. And so what we did immediately after 2021 is we redirected the channel and ended up with a westerly flow in our channel that is actually center feeding the main part of the slough. So this channel that my cursor is following now, we built that in 2022 to redirect it and keep that high flow water from hitting the dike of Highway 7. And then we left a flood flow on the main flow, or where the main flow was, but it's also has a radius put into it to bring it back into center flow. And the reason is we were concerned that if we brought all the water through the new channel, that it would just find its way to overtop and then would continue to build back into Highway 7. So what we're hoping was, in our school of thought with that, was split the water, split the volumes, and we can keep it center flow. So and so far we've gone through a couple of rain events that created flooding anywhere else or elsewhere through our reserve lands. It didn't affect that, so we made the right choice at that point. So probably this is the part where you and I should maybe get together on it, but how can risk be co-managed in multiple governing bodies with differing values? How do we come together? How do we make this better? How can we accept? How can we find ourselves to a place where we accept the Indigenous knowledge? Before we get into that, so I don't want to date myself, but it was back in the early 80s. I was sent back to the Red River with Department of Fisheries on some flooding in the Red River. And I grew up in a household of engineers, but also Indigenous. So I like to believe that, I don't like to believe. I can tell you right now that 90% of what I practice is my Indigenous knowledge. 10% is what I learned in the universities when I went to school. So, and absolutely, without a doubt. So when I went back, or any time I went into a community for DFO, I wanted to talk to some of that traditional knowledge, some of the local knowledge. And that's settlers too. You know, after 4 or 5 generations, they know what's going on around them. There was a fellow in the back of the room that I was presenting and trying to collect information on how we could correct the challenge that we were facing with the red. And he was mumbling, and everybody else was kind of just trying to make him shut up. And I, no, stop. Everybody stop. And I asked him to stand. And I said, please share with me. That's why I'm here. Share with me. And he says, I don't know what you guys aren't getting. He says, the mountains don't know how to drink the water anymore. That was in the early 80s. We didn't even start thinking about climate change, water reaction, water challenges. You know, how our slopes were not permeating, the hydrophobia in our slopes. None of that came to us. And truly, 2021, I mean, we were talking about it before it, but we weren't acting. We weren't acting on it. We're acting now, but we're acting too late, right? But here's an elder back in the early 80s telling me that the mountains don't know how to drink the water anymore. So we did him good. We took that back and we changed his language to say, the mountainside or the mid-slope is hydrophobic. And I go back, and if I was to go back and say to him, oh yeah, no, I get it, the mid-slope's hydrophobic, he'd have clubbed me with his club, right? But that's exactly what I'm talking about. That is the challenge that we have in accepting Indigenous knowledge. So it's understanding what they're trying to tell us, believing in it, and moving it forward. Now, I've been accepted, and I've had a fairly good career. And I've been accepted, but I was educated in the Western system. I was also educated in the traditional system. So I get the opportunity or the greatest value of being recognized both ways. So I'm believable. I am a believable person because I carry letters beside my name. That's why when I was asked earlier, am I here to talk about it in that way? No, I'm not a practicing engineer. I don't want to be seen that way anymore. I want to be seen in my traditional values so I can help that piece to help us all. That's what I want to see. But that's what's missing. It's missing. We are missing the understanding and the believability of the information that we should be collecting from them. The information that told us that DeRose Creek was being challenged by what was going on, and here's why. This is where DeRose Creek used to flow. Why did it change? And why didn't we run it on the other side of the railway tracks way back when it was changed, right? Why did all of those things? So we should have been listening to that. We should have altered the stream before we built the homes that now stops us from being able to do it today. That's why traditional knowledge is so important. It's not going to replace the school book. The other thing we need to understand is that knowledge has been collected for tens of thousands of years in a different way. We understand and believe because we read it in a book. Well, I can tell you this. I'll go back to SFU right now, or I can go over to and I do work with Derek Masselink at our RRU and the Environmental Governance Program. The books that they're using today, the materials that they're using today have changed very little from what they were in the 80s and 90s, right? So there isn't the ability for it to move at the pace that it needs to move to get to believability of Indigenous knowledge. There isn't. We could change it with K-12 because K-12 is only coming out with a grade 12 certificate, moving them to getting them ready to go out into the workforce, right, in a post-secondary system. But it's not that easy in advanced education, and we're finding that out. I'm working with the ministry right now and trying to figure out how do we get there? How do we get there?
I'm going to flip us over to kind of maybe the discussions that you and I have been having about how do we move forward from this. And I know we just flipped over really cool engineering drawings, so sorry to the engineers in the room. But what I wanted to maybe have this conversation about was how do we collaborate? How do we move forward? What are we doing? And you gave me this really good example from your Guardian program. So maybe what is a Guardian? And what do they do for First Nation communities? So
the Guardians are our future. They truly are. They're who you will be connecting with as time goes on. The photo in front of you here has, the ones in red are my active Guardians, and I have 23 in our program. So we probably have one of the largest programs across Canada. The ones in blue are my youth. They're grade 11 and grade 12 students. There's a couple of them missing in this photo, actually. The very pretty one in the center, that's my granddaughter. But these guardians, they learn from our elders. So they go through and they work with our knowledge keepers and elders in our community, but they've also completed the Vancouver Island University program. So, and that one is the environmental technicians, and it's accredited by the College of Biology. So they're believable. They're believable because they have the College of Biology beside their environmental technician program. They wouldn't be as believable if we were still running the Guardian program the way that we used to, as just Guardians, because they go on to the sites where we work daily, and they're looked at as, and forgive me for saying this, but I'm Native, so I can say that, the token Indian, right? They're not token Indians anymore. Our Guardians are trained. They're experts in the field. They're doing a great job. We're in demand. We're at 23 right now. I've posted to get 4 more in, and we're looking at 6 more before we get to the month of June. We're that much in demand, and we built it now from capacity fund. I'm funded for 2, and look at the size of my program. We're fee for service. We're delivering a service that people are paying for. And and more demand on the teams that we're building, and this is right across Canada. Leq'á is probably leading in it, but we're working through the Tier 3 support to help other nations get to the same place. So I think that's probably what you were trying to get out of me.
Yeah, and I think as a professional coming in, what I often have to do with my communities is recognize that my stamp and seal has a lot of authority and weight. So what I do is I talk about that, I just address it. I have it in my discussions, I say, I know that my stamp and seal has more weight unfairly than traditional knowledge does. And we just say that. And we say, recognizing that that is happening in this environment, how do we work together to address the gaps in equality and equity? And that's recognizing that system that's in place, those checkboxes that Rick was talking about, is that we know that that exists, we know it's unfair, but we're going to work together to bridge some of those gaps. And I think a really important part of that is when you're designing things like Guardian programs, and is now required under many government-funded grants, is that they are paid equitable rates to consultants. So you think your rates are high? Be prepared now for, on your contracts, your rates for your monitors, for your guardians, are going to be equitable to your rates. And see that as a value that the community is providing, right? So it is a benefit to do that, but it's something we all have to recognize when we're building our collaborations together, is that you're going to have some of your budget taken away. And you have to be okay with that, because I think that's an important component, is capacity building within these communities. And when we work together, we're also introducing these youth to these kinds of different education systems as well. So these different career opportunities, and as your guardians are all trained, they can also go on to other kinds of jobs that aren't just within your community.
Yeah, and they're trained better than you.
Probably.
I say that jokingly, but they're trained through the traditional knowledge and through the Western knowledge, or through the Western sciences, through the textbook. That was the first thing, and that was most important to me, and it was a real challenge for me to get that by my elders in my community, because to them, still, they're products of the residential school. I'm a product of the residential school. Like, it's residential school isn't in our rearview mirror. It's still here and it still exists. So many of our elders, when you say school, their response is, all they do is rape and kill you there, right? I have an aunt that never came home. So she's one of them that didn't come home. I live in that, but my dad taught me at our dinner table was, you can be whatever you want to be and I'll be there to help you get there, right? That was my stress. That was my challenge. I lived through those times. They weren't doing that when you were there. So let that be mine. You go out and make your own, but make your own better. But unfortunately, there's others that, and me and my 9 siblings, we're very successful, all of us. My wife, on the other hand, she's the product of the same challenges, and the teachings that she had was school rapes and kills you. And so she quit school. None of her brothers and sisters, there's 6 of them, not one of them completed school. And my wife went on and she's got more letters beside her name than I do, so I've got to figure out another program I can go into so I can get some more letters by my name. So I don't, no, I'm kidding. And she, the worst thing is she's a psychologist. So I'm being analyzed 100% of the time. But anyways, that's getting away from where we should be. So Leq'á. And Leq'á is so important. And you know, Prime Minister Trudeau, when I went to him, and the first presentation that I did to them back in Ottawa, that's 3 years ago now, I led with Leq'á. And surprisingly, he knew what Leq'á was. I was shocked. Our own MPs from our area didn't know. He right away looked at me and he said, working together, that's why you're here. So, and that's great. Leq'á is an upper Hakamelam word, and it's working together with one heart, from one heart and one mind. So it's us all working together to get to a better solution. That's what it is. I lead all of my talks, all of my discussions with Leq'á, and I believe we need to do it more. I believe that we can't say that word enough, or at least other ways of saying the same thing, that we truly mean to be here, we want to be here, and if we do, then we'll have solutions that are going to be satisfying to all of us. The other one is the two-eye seeing, and I'm sure you've all heard that. So two-eye seeing is what led to the K-12 curriculum change and the Indigenous lens. Two-eye seeing is seeing one eye, seeing it through a Western lens, and one eye seeing it through a traditional lens. That is absolutely applied in the K-12 curriculum. We lead the world People are looking at us from around the world for the K-12 curriculum we have. We need to move that now into our advanced education. But in more recent years, we come to realize too, seeing works for K-12, it's not working past K-12. We need two legs walking. And that's becoming more and more, and you're hearing it more and more coined now. And it's translated, that is, we all see it. We're looking and working through the same lens, but we're working together, two legs, walking forward. And I think the more we say that, the more we embed that in our minds, the more it's going to help guys like us move that forward, because every one of you are going to be going to whoever you need to go to now and say, hey, we need to change the education system, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but anyways, and then the other one is the canoe, and the canoe is everything to Indigenous people in the Salish territory, and what this depicts is that we're connected. The canoes are connected, and the canoes are all paddling the same direction all together. That's what that is all about. And I think when Carrie Ann showed me these today, I thought you couldn't have done a better job of selecting photos to go into this one. But anyways,
I think like an important part of this is like, as we do these projects together, I'm finding as a consultant, when we collaborate in these discussions and have these two legs walking together, it's collaborating means that in the end we aren't just doing consultation and saying, hey, here's my design, here's what I'm going to go construct, please approve and stamp it. When we talk about collaborating and having these approaches together, it's a partnership from the beginning, and you don't have to go through a referrals process. You're already part of the conversation, and it's not some hindrance at the end. And I find even internally within my own company, often I'm coming at the last minute. Help me indigenize my proposal, help me figure out these ways of doing these things. I'm not an Indigenous person even, right? And it's this frustrating part. If we step back and we say, let's get the Indigenous perspectives at the start of the project, at the proposal stage, at the tender stage, it's going to be more successful, and it's going to be something that has cost benefits throughout. It's not going to be protracted, it's not going to be prolonged. We're collaborating together. It may look frustrating in the beginning, but in the end, what I found is that it's not just a report I'm handing to a community that goes off and does nothing. It's actually something that's worked through, that's developed, and we see measurable risk reduction in my world.
Yeah, and so true. I sent money back this year from our Lands and Natural Resources Department for our referrals team. When I started, it was the largest department in the Lands and Natural Resources Department, our referrals. We have one now. We have one referrals officer, because everything that comes through, he walks through to either Tina's office or my office, and Tina leads my environmental team. I lead more of the technical side, but he'll come in, he'll put them on our desk. Have you seen this? And we get to say, yeah, we've been involved with that right from the start, right from the brainchild or from concept, or at least through the construction drawing phase of it. We've been involved with it, so we don't need a referral. Look at the money that you're saving by not having that and being reinvested. So we talked about effectiveness and efficiencies. We can't see the effective and efficiencies through what we were talking about earlier this afternoon, and I thought about that a little bit after we had that discussion. We're finding on the outcomes that we have greater efficiencies than we've ever had throughout the entire project, but we're also finding that the Indigenous offices are now paring down in some of the areas and growing up in others. And when you look at the way that we're delivering the program to have this knowledge and understanding and being plugged into this new collaborative approach, that is money that we're earning. It's a business model. It's fee for service. So it's money that isn't coming from Big Brother to pay us to be natives in an office, right? We're more than that. We're real. We're believable. Mm-hmm. And that word I try and use as much as possible, because that's what curriculum needs to see to have it changed. We need believability. We need the checkbox. We need to find a way that we can take elders' knowledge, the way that we have with all of the post-secondary programs that we have, check the box. Yes, I completed this part, and the expected outcome of this formed the program that I'm in. And we checked that one because you forgot that. Have you ever seen one on Indigenous knowledge? Doesn't exist, right? But yet it is equally as important in the education programming if we're going to get to where we need to be successful and more effective and efficient in the work that we do.
Okay, so how do we do this practically? And I have a really great photo here, and Lucy's in the audience with me. This is from one of the communities that I work with locally in the interior in Shakin in Kapamilk territory. And you can see this was not anything we were aware of. This was a community bulletin that was issued long after we had come back from the field. And it described how the experts, and in quotations, came out to the assessment, and the chief led us through the land as he saw it, and some of the issues that they're facing following a wildfire. And it was truly a humbling moment. Many of you may look at me as a debris flow expert, but really I'm not an expert in the lands. I come at it from a lens of Western science. I come at it looking at a certain perspective, but I don't live there. I haven't seen the changes. I haven't seen how the environment forms. And so a lot of what I do now within my projects is we talk about collaborating together. So we're including traditional knowledge within our reports. We're specifically calling it out with permission, with attribution, and saying how that is building our integrated understanding of how geohazards are affecting a community. So we consider it all together in this approach. We're not just looking at it from Western science. We're going out with the community and trusting what they're saying about the landscape. Now, to do that, though, you have to think a little bit differently and a little bit more flexibly. And so sometimes I have to go and say, this is how I see things, how do you see things? We have to acknowledge that there's this believability, as Rick has been talking about, with Indigenous knowledge. And it's something of a humbling effect to come out and say, I'm not the expert anymore. I'm an expert in my own view, but there's something about being an expert within a community itself. And so I think part of that is acknowledging that and being ready to have maybe some guilt thrown at us. Maybe it's a little bit of humbling guilt, but it's not shame. So I don't come into these communities and try and think, I'm a settler coming in and I'm going to tell them and disseminate information. We do it together and we do it collaboratively. And when I screw up, and I've screwed up a lot with these communities, we talk through it, we apologize, and we work together to make it right. So it's something that we're partnering on and building trust. And that's a really important part of these conversations, is I'm building trust over cups of coffee, not because of how smart I am. And I have to tell myself that every single morning, is I may have degrees and letters after my name, but there is nothing more important than trust built in connection with each other.
Yeah, and that leads to that believability, and if there's one thing that Indigenous people have truly learned, it's that it didn't work by putting shame on them, right? It didn't work. It didn't work by not listening and being a part of what was going forward. It didn't work, right? We're not looking to take anything away. So when you look at Article 29, or when you look at DRIPA, when you look at DRIPA and UNDRIP, it says the rights and title, Indigenous rights and title and stewardship of the land. We don't want your land. We don't want your land. I promise you, no Indigenous person is going to come up and say, I want your farm and now I'm going to live on it. That's not what it's about. It's about the right to the land just being recognized. That's what it is. Recognize that we had a right that was taken away from us. And another one, and it maybe doesn't belong in this forum, but maybe it does. You're seeing the settlements that are coming through. You need to recognize what those are and not call them out on it, right? These are lands that were taken away from our forefathers. They were taken away from them. They farmed them. They lived on. They farmed differently. They farmed by harvesting the deer that ran freely there at that time. They didn't have to grow the cow because the deer was there, right? They farmed the Indigenous garden, which was natural. It was hosamberry, it was blueberry, or blackberries, or huckleberries, or whatever it was that was growing in the area that they were. They farmed it. That was their land, and it was come and taken away. They've just paid for it now. That's what they've done. So these people that are getting these settlements, they're inheriting no different than anybody else here will inherit from their parents. That's all it is. And they're certainly not inheriting the value that the land was worth. But have respect for that, right? And that's a difficult thing to say, because, but it's something that we need to say. People need to understand that that's an inheritance, no different than anybody else, because they're brown skin doesn't mean they don't deserve inheritance, right?
I'm gonna do something different. We didn't rehearse this. This is gonna be a little bit of a surprise to you. I'm gonna end with a poem by a Métis author that I think really speaks to when you reminded me about the Red River. So this is a poem by Métis author Katrina Vermette. It talks about for the Red River. This river is old, her story is long, this river is wide and open. But this river is broken. She's like the pillars of old piers, the ones that stick out of the water at the shore, lapped over by every wake. You can't always see, but she is always there. This river is ignored. People cross the street to avoid this river. They pretend they mean to go that way all along, but no one can tell by the hunch in their shoulders. You can tell by the hunch in their shoulders. No one wants to be anywhere near this river. This river's so inconvenient. They had to make bridges to cut across her, inconsistent bends, straight lines to make up for all her dangerous curves. But this river's smart. Street smart and book smart, this river has learned and she's been schooled. This river is so well read, she's worn out. This river's a trickster. She can slick her lips, smile you closer, and just when you think you have her, she puffs black smoke and laps off into her next form. How rational is this river? This river is a bitch in a mood. She won't let you throw anchor where you want to, won't let you go because you want to. But this river's sweet. She can be so gentle, so beautiful. She is a water carrier after all. She is love. She is the eagle soaring above the trees. She is power pushing pure north. She's the reason we're all here. She carried us all on her brown, broad back. Without complaint, this river's only payment has been our refusals, indifference. But this river doesn't need your attention or your inquiry. This river is too busy doing what she has always done, kicking ass and taking care. This river has never been idle. She was here before you, and she will be here long after we've all gone. We in there?
That was awesome.
Thank you, everyone, for a very different conversation.